A little bit about me. My name is Akil Parker, as Brother Patrick said. I teach math. I've been teaching math for a long time, almost 20 years. I live in Philadelphia, and my goal is to teach math to the entire black community. And with the resources that we have, such as namely the internet, social media, I think that we can leverage that and really make it happen. So the title of my presentation is Histematics, Math for Political Education. And Histematics is a teaching framework that I've come up with, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what that is in a moment. So let's get started. First thing I want to say, and I want to say this more often in a lot of the conversations that I have about mathematics, is that we first have to understand that we were never meant to learn math in this nation. And I think that that's very important to consider, because with all of the conversations about math deficiency in the black community, low test scores in the black community, we somehow, often a lot of times, we're convinced to believe that this is somehow accidental or it's coincidental. And we think that our kids just aren't smart enough. We think that the schools aren't good enough. We think the education system is broken. It's not broken. It works perfectly fine. It's very efficient to achieve the goal that it has. People in the black community have been deficient on a large scale at mathematics for many, many years. If the system was broken, it would have been fixed by now. So what we have to understand is that the goal is for us, myself included, my children included, to not become proficient in mathematics. That is the actual goal. Because it's not that difficult to really learn mathematics if you have teachers that really understand the concept, understand the subject, and you create the learning environment that's necessary for people to learn it. Because there are people among us that do learn and do excel. And it's not that hard to do that, right? I think about Amos Wilson. One of the things Amos Wilson said, the ancestor, is that the challenge for white supremacy, the challenge for the society we live in, is to give the impression that they actually are trying to improve learning conditions and improve educational outcomes for us, while at the same time maintain the status quo so that they actually don't change. That's the real challenge. The challenge is to give this impression, make it seem like, yes, we want to boost test scores, we want black children to learn math, but really they don't, right? Because why? Because math scholars are too difficult to oppress. Because when people start learning math, they start asking too many questions. They start challenging things. They start wondering, why is this way? They start recognizing contradictions, which is essentially what happens whenever you solve an equation. When you solve an equation, you find out, just like when somebody lies to you. And when you sit back and say to yourself, wait, something ain't adding up. This don't make sense. That's mathematical thinking. That's what you're doing whenever you exercise, whenever you do that, whenever you say that, whenever you think that. Right? If too many people are able to recognize when something's not adding up, when the left side of the equation is not equivalent to the right side of the equation, then we start to, raise our hands and, raise our voice and say, wait, hold up, right? And then rooms like this become more filled up, right? And then we have more and more rooms like this with people thinking the way we might be thinking, right? And that becomes a problem for the society, all right? So this is my position as to why so many of us, are deficient in mathematics. There's a lot of propaganda around it to make us believe that it's too difficult, too hard, and then we get into the point where we start thinking that it's irrelevant because we want to protect our ego, and it becomes a defense mechanism, why I gotta learn this anyway, right? That's what happens after that. All right, so let me move on. Also, I think about guerrilla education. So what happens is when we think about political education, one of the things we should consider is that math education can be a subterfuge for political education, meaning by teaching our children math very deeply and very heavily, we're actually simultaneously developing them in terms of political education, right? And when I say it's a subterfuge, it's like, so white people might give you some grant money to have some math programs, but if we understand what math really is and what math is supposed to be, what's actually happening is we're teaching them political education. We're teaching them to see the value of black nationalism. We're teaching them to see the value of Pan-African nationalism. We're teaching them to see the value in gaining power, land, and resources, right? But we can call it math. You want to call it math, call it math. A lot of bleeding heart white liberals that will give us money because they actually want to incorporate us into what they're doing, right? So that we can be representation, quote unquote, right? So they can feel better about themselves. So we can do that if we need to, but just as long as we know what we're actually doing. We're actually trying to develop our political consciousness and our political awareness. And mathematics is a system, an academic discipline that can enable that. So I put this slide up here because I got fired from a teaching job in 2012, right? I was teaching at a high school in Philadelphia. I've been there for 4 years. And the reason I put this slide here is because it relates to what I'm talking about. I ended up going to graduate school in that period, right after I got fired in 2012. And I returned to the classroom in 2015. And before I returned to the classroom, I was a little concerned, because I was thinking to myself, I haven't taught full time in the past 2 years. So I felt like I might have been out of practice. I was working in little after school programs, but I wasn't doing that typical grind. I wasn't Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. I wasn't doing that on a regular basis, but I was doing a lot of reading, doing a lot of studying about history. One book I definitely remember reading at that time was by Kwame Nkrumah, Osaji for Kwame Nkrumah, Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. That book really opened my eyes to a lot of things, right? About finance, but global finance, but from an African-centered, Pan-African perspective. So I was able to understand what Nkrumah was talking about all of the resources specifically, and mathematically he outlined like how much France stole from this nation, how much Great Britain stole from this nation, how much Portugal stole specifically, as opposed to just being anecdotal and saying, well, yeah, they stole this, they took that. Nkrumah laid it out to a penny, right? To a specific, milligram, to a specific pound, the tonnage, all that type of stuff, right? When I got back into the classroom, I realized that I hadn't really lost a step, because the way I was studying, a lot of this history, a lot of this political science, I was approaching it the same way I would approach math problems. So I realized that there's an overlap. There's a definite overlap between mathematics, history, political science, and so on and so forth. I gotta thank Brother Patrick for this quote. I had heard this quote before. I heard Brother Patrick on a podcast recently, and he quoted Elijah Muhammad. Asking good questions is half of learning. It's one of the things I tell my students in my math classes. You gotta ask the right questions. You gotta ask, what's the next step in this process? You gotta ask, why am I doing this next step in this process? You gotta ask, how do I do this process, right? You gotta ask the right questions. Sometimes it's not about the answer, it's more so about the questions that you're asking, especially if something doesn't make sense. You gotta ask the right questions. So there are 3 main questions. What is math? Because a lot of people have issues with math because we don't really know what it is, right? What is Histematics? That's something that I'm developing. And what is political education? First and foremost, what is math? Look at that diagram up there. A lot of us have been conditioned to be made uncomfortable when we see something that looks like that. That's programming. That's social engineering. You see something like that, why do you think every time on social media somebody posts something that's supposed to be confusing, there's a bunch of math and formulas and everything behind it, right? That's programming. That's psychological. That's propaganda, right? We have to reprogram ourselves to realize that this is just a language. That's all math is. Math is a language. I promise you, if you start trying to study a language that you've never seen before today, it will be confusing to you. But if you want to study that language and learn it, you'll push through, you'll persevere. And it won't be as difficult as you think it is, right? Mathematics is just a language based upon patterns in nature that can be utilized for problem solving and for the development of critical and analytical thinking ability. So math is about problem solving, right? This is why you can't learn math. Because if you learn math, you learn how to solve your problems. And before that, you learn how to identify your problems.
Come on.
You won't be thinking everything is sweet. A lot of us have problems in our communities that we don't even recognize it right in front of us. But because we don't have the analytical ability to identify what a problem is, we don't just see it. And it's right there in plain view, right? So, but understand this, for every problem that you have, there's somebody benefiting from your problem. So this is why you can't learn math, because if you learn math, then you'll learn how to solve the problem. And if you solve the problem, what you've done is, you've created a problem for the person that was benefiting from your problem. Because now they've lost their benefit. Now the tables have turned. So this is why you can't learn math, right? That's cui bono, right? Always think about who benefits from a situation, all right? So always keep that in mind. What is Histematics? Histematics is the intentional approach of using history to teach math and using math to teach history. This is done from an African-centered standpoint, and the teaching methodology is broken down into 5 distinct elements. Due to time, I won't get into all the specifics of that, but basically it's like this. An example was this. We were in the chapel, the elder was talking about the Tubulu 9, so we can talk about mathematics, talking to young people and have young people practicing addition facts. What's 7 plus 2? 7 plus 2 is 9. Okay. You know what else is significant about the number 9? Now let's talk about the Tubulu 9. So we talk about history and math at the same time. So what we're doing is we're reincorporating this, and this often doesn't happen a lot in a lot of public schools and charter school spaces, that African cultural norm of storytelling, that aspect is not often included with mathematics. Because mathematics is seen as very very overly objective, and just very sterile and just straightforward X's and Y's and numbers, and that's it. There's no storytelling aspect. It's more difficult to remember the processes. But if I tell a young person the story about the 2 Blue 9, and we give it a human aspect to it, right? And then we say, okay, so yeah, I remember 7 was 7 of them, and there was 2 of them, or 5 of them were men and 4 women. We put that together, 5 plus 4 is 9. Oh yeah, I remember the story of 2 Blue 9 in Mississippi. And yeah, and then I'm thinking about, oh yeah, this is what we need to be doing in 2023, right? So again, political education. A lot of our young people have never heard of 2 Blue 9. Even myself, I'll admit. Before this weekend, I never heard of 2 Blue 9. You know? But this is why we're lifelong learners. So we can learn things on a regular basis. So that's Histematics, right? Political education. Political education is the act of raising awareness of social and economic relationship dynamics and groups of people, among individuals and groups of people. It's not just civics. A lot of times, a lot of us, again, we're conditioned to think that when we see the word political, we think electoral politics. So every 4 years, we just concern ourselves with who's running for president. Politics goes on every single day. Politics is about the relationships between individuals and between groups of individuals. Economics, resources. Who's going to get what? How things are going to be allocated. Who's making those decisions? What do we get and what do we not get? So when you're not getting something, somebody else is getting it. Right?
Yes, sir.
Political education enables us to think about this. But the concepts that are embedded within political education are the same exact concepts that are embedded within trigonometry, embedded within pre-calculus, embedded within algebra 1, algebra 2, embedded within geometry. Speaking of geometry, a lot of people think geometry, and I didn't understand this when I was in high school taking geometry. A lot of people think geometry is just about shapes and angles and circles and whatnot, and that's part of it. But when you think about geometric proofs, think this. I did a presentation in 2016 about Black Lives Matter. I was critical of Black Lives Matter, and I looked at it from a mathematical standpoint. One of my critiques of it as a movement was this. Black Lives Matter intends to get us as black people to try to prove that our lives matter. In geometry, when you have to solve a geometric proof, you start out with given information, and then from that given information, you actually prove something else. Then you go through a series of steps, which include statements and theories, postulates, and whatnot, to arrive at a conclusion. And you can prove that that's what it means. So it's not just, well, I feel this way. No, it's proof. We use mathematical proof to prove that. We should not have to prove that our life matters. That's nothing to be proved. That in geometry and a geometric proof will be considered given information. But a lot of us want to prove to white folks that our lives matter in order to benefit from that. So they say, oh, well, look, my life matters. Don't shoot me. I already know my life matters. That's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. It's insane. I'm not going to try to prove to you my life matters. What we can prove, we start with giving information that my life matters and that our lives matter, and then we can try to prove what's the best method to secure land, power, and resources. That's something we can try to prove. We have debates among ourselves about that. But we should not be trying to prove that our life matters and try to get gain the favor of Europeans and get them to stop killing us and be nicer to us or let us come work at their jobs and live in their neighborhoods. And again, so math shows this relationship. And it puts us out there. Another reason. You can't have too many of us thinking like that. Then we wouldn't buy into stuff like that. We'd be buying into much more radical things. Right? So my position is basically, if more of our people had a strong math background, especially in algebra concepts, the validity and the necessity of political economic positions that we espouse, those of us in this room, and promote as black nationalists and Pan-African nationalists, would be obvious to many more of us. Because I'm sure when you talk to people about some things that are very obvious to you, they look at you like you got 3 heads. Okay. They look at you like you're out of your damn mind. Right? I think some people are scared, but there's some people that aren't scared. Some people that they have not been wired to think that way and see the logic in what you're saying. Right? Now, everybody with math acumen won't subscribe. Because you can say, well, what about, math PhDs and people with PhDs in quantum physics and all that? They're not trying to be down either, right? That's a valid point. But I believe that those people, or at least many of them, they largely won't subscribe because they just don't think we can win. It's like, I hear what you're talking about, I see it makes sense, but I don't think we can win. And I think they don't think we can win because we don't have strength in numbers, right? So they're still thinking mathematically. They're like, yeah, you make a good point, but I don't think we can win, right? But if we get those numbers up, more people thinking this way, then we will have the numbers, and then more people will buy in. right? So greater numbers of people with this analytical ability, those that understand the logic, but are reluctant, may then buy in. The solution, teach our children math early and often. Early and often, as early as possible. Math is the key, right? I'm convinced, math is the key. I have resources to aid in this effort I'll talk about at the end of this presentation, right? Because math is kind of like treated like, okay, it's the subject, it's taught in school, you don't really like it, it's seen as something separate from our everyday lives, right? And it's got to stop being that. It's got to become incorporated, intertwined with our daily activity. We got to be thinking mathematically, and we got to instill and figure out ways to have our children exposed to as much math as possible. As many math programs on Saturdays, as many math summer programs, as many math after-school programs, and not just if you sign your kids up for these STEM programs, make sure they're really STEM programs. Because the nonprofit industrial complex is throwing a lot of money at anything called STEM these days, and a lot of times that's not really happening. You're not really getting STEM in those programs. So make sure you do your due diligence and make sure you know what's going on inside those rooms. All right, I got a couple of examples. Brother Patrick, do I have time?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So I got a couple of examples. I was thinking about shrimp po' boys, right?
Yeah.
This reminds me of evaluating expressions in algebra, right? Because you think about a shrimp po' boy, it's called a po' boy, right? It was made originally for poor people back in 1929, striking workers back in New Orleans in 1929. They were giving these sandwiches away for free. But nowadays, the average price for a shrimp po' boy is like $13, $14. It's not for poor people. But the idea is that and economics is not just something that just comes out of the sky. There are groups of white men, powerful white men that get in rooms and make decisions about economics. And what the price of this is going to be, what the price of that's going to be, what the value of this is, what the value of that is, right? So it's been determined that this will be more expensive now, right? So the same thing happens in algebra. If any of y'all are taking an algebra 1 class, you remember this, look at some of the later bullets. Evaluate the expression 2a plus 3b for a plus 3b for a equals 1 and b equals 6. All that means is just replace the a with a 1, replace the b with a 6, and then multiply and add the two numbers together. You get 26, right? But I can take the same expression, replace the a with a positive 1, replace the b with a negative 9, and I get a different value. I get negative 25. It's the same expression, but I can manipulate it though. This is a typical math concept, right? The same thing happens with the value of anything that we deal with in this economy, right? So just think about things like that. Like how is it, I think about, I remember this song came out, I was teaching, Meat Mill Monster, some of y'all might be familiar with it. One of his lines, the money turned my noodles into pasta. The money turned my tuna into lobster. But we never stop to think, why does lobster cost more than tuna? Whose decision is that? Like, why is that? Like, is lobster really that more rare than tuna? Do we know? But if somebody just got in a room and decided, this is going to be more, this is going to be priced this is going to be priced this. That's an issue of power. That's not an issue of the value of lobster, the value of tuna, or the noodles and the pasta. I'm sure he was referring to ramen noodles. Being poor, growing up in North Philly, South Philly, ate ramen noodles. Now he's in restaurants eating the pasta from the restaurant. How does he know that pasta from the restaurant is more valuable than the ramen noodles? How do you know it doesn't come from the same materials? But because it's being served in a fancy restaurant, now it's like, oh, it's more expensive. But again, this is manipulation. And the same thing happens in algebra. Right? Plug the numbers in. And you get different numbers. You get different amounts. But it's the same expression. That's one example. Another example, episodes of history. We got the elder Baba Asa Hilliard. We all should be familiar. It's Asa Hilliard. All right? Did a lot of work in Atlanta at Georgia State University. I was thinking about scatter plots, because one of the things when we talk about episodes of history, we tend to be very episodic in terms of history. Like this happened at this time, this happened at this time. And because we're episodic, it's like scatter plots. So again, if you ever taken algebra, you might have composed a graph and plotted points on a graph, a bunch of random points. They seem to have no relationship until you draw a curve through the points. Then the history is connected. It's like the elder Baba Figures in the chapter is telling the story about 1839, right? Until you make the connections between 1839, a college like Tougaloo, Lerone Bennett, going to Lanier, the different things like that, then you can understand the story. Then you see the connection between these things, right? So there's another math concept. You got to construct or draw that what we call a line of best fit. Draw the line of best fit to connect those points. Now you're connecting the dots. Now the history starts to make sense. But a lot of times, the history is not meant to make sense. It's meant to just confuse you. And you're meant to just see a bunch of random dates, random people, random events that seem to have no relationship to each other whatsoever. This is meant to confuse us. So we understand how we're supposed to, rectify this in mathematics. We can see how we can rectify this in our everyday experience with our own history that we deal with. Because the episodic approach to history, it causes us to be ahistorical. It's like you know the history, but now you don't really know the history because you don't know the connections between the historical events and how one thing might have been a cause of one event and one was an effect of another event. Transitive property is one of my favorites. It's got one of my intellectual revolutionary heroes, Kwame Ture, when he was young. Probably was in Mississippi when they took that picture, right? Transitive property. A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. I think about something he said. He was debating Bayard Rustin, and he was talking about integration. He said integration is just a subterfuge. I like that word, subterfuge. The subterfuge for the maintenance of white supremacy. That's all it is. Right? It was meant to be that. So I think about a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives of today, DEI. It's a big buzzword, big buzz term in the society right now. I see DEI as just the next iteration of integration. So if I agree with the premise that Kwame Ture offered, integration is just a subterfuge for the maintenance of white supremacy. DEI is just the next iteration, so it's essentially equal to integration. Now we can conclude that DEI is also a subterfuge for the maintenance of white supremacy. So this is where we get to. And this is the transitive property. It's one of those properties that a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this as a teacher, you teach the students these properties in the beginning of the algebra course, devoid of context. They're in the beginning of the textbook, chapter 1, section 1. You got to memorize all these properties. Early in my career, I wasn't thinking like this. I think like this now. So when I talk about these properties, these are the examples that I'm using, right? But DEI, so this speaks to something else. Actually, Brother Patrick was talking about on that podcast. And he's very passionate about Deion Sanders. It's inclusion. So a lot of us we see that Deion Sanders being a coach in Buffalo and Colorado now as a win, as hashtag Black Excellence. But it's for the purpose of the maintenance of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Including them, right? It's like one thing I remember, Dr. Carr from Howard University said. He said this years ago in a lecture I was at. He said, white people are going to destroy us by telling us how great we are.
Come on.
They're going to tell us how great we are. They're going to invite us in so that we won't have the will or the desire to go build anything for ourselves. So people will say, well, I can go over here and get the money. But you have to understand, if you're not part of a strong group, again, ain't explosive. If you're not part of a strong group, your individual wealth and your individual comfort is not guaranteed because you're not part of a strong group. But a lot of people say, well, I can't, I don't think we can win, so I'm going to go over here with these white folks and get this money and feel secure, but you can't never be secure anyway because they can take it at any point. A lot of our people don't understand. I think that's a mathematical concept. Again, taking it back to the math. A couple more examples, net positives. A lot of times corporations will come into our communities. The government will come into our communities and give resources, give programs. We don't look at what they're taking away. It might give you something, it might give you a program. A program might cost $100,000. You might benefit from the program, they're going to bring the news out there. People are going to post on social media, and actually celebrities, whoever. It's going to get a lot of exposure, right? They made a $100,000 investment. Behind the scenes, they're taking or extracting $5 million. You don't think about the $5 million. It's not a net positive. It's a net negative. You get $100,000, they take $5 million. It's a net negative. It's a net result of $4,900,000 that we lost. But that part doesn't get advertised. So again, these are algebraic concepts. And this is why it's important for your children, for us, to not understand how to add and subtract positive and negative numbers. Because if you can't add and subtract positive and negative numbers, this concept is unreal to you. It doesn't make any sense. Somebody starts talking about this, you're looking at them like they got 3 heads. So it's significant for you to not be taught about this concept of how to add and subtract positive numbers and negative numbers, how to multiply and divide positive and negative numbers, because then these things become just strange to you. And so it's like another language. And it is another language, but it's a language that we can learn. And I'm advocating heavily that we learn this language. All right? So always think about it's fine to think about what's given, but make sure you always also think about what's being taken. And again, so we have the ancestor Amos Wilson, two concepts, standardization and complements, like complementary angles. So when we talk about like the standard form of an equation, that's all arbitrary. Right? In the textbook, we might represent the relationship between some numbers, ax plus by equals c. That's the standard form of a linear equation. Y equals mx plus b. Which I see people complain about all the time. They say stuff like, I see it on social media all the time, oh, another day of my life went by, I still haven't used y equals mx plus b. Right? Y equals mx plus b is not the standard form, but that's all arbitrary. It could be standard. One of the things Amos Wilson talked about was there's no such thing as standard business practice. There are business practices that benefit the European community, and they call those standard. Same thing with standard education. There are educational practices that benefit the European community, and they just call them standard, so that we'll respect them more. Right? We could have our own standard education. What's standard for us? What's standard for us is not going to be standard for other groups, because the education that we need needs to be revolutionary. It needs to teach our children to really destroy what this is. The education that people that are already in power needs to be conservative, because they're trying to conserve it. They're trying to maintain it. We're trying to build something different. So we can't have the same education. But a lot of us get the same education. And that's why a lot of times we don't move forward, because we get the same education. We get the education that's meant to be conservative to conserve the system that is destroying us. So this is what happens. So we got to think about these things. So we got to start the question like, well, what does standard really mean? Like, what's the standard form of this equation and whatnot? Another thing, complements. Back to geometry, complementary angles. Some of y'all might remember, complementary angles that add up to 90 degrees. They complement each other. They're adjacent, they add up to 90 degrees, they form a right angle, right? But think about the complementary relationships between groups. Black community is a group of consumers, while the white community needs to be the producers. That's a complementary relationship. But we have to ask ourselves, does that help? Is it okay for them to make everything? We just go buy everything? Right? So the math should bring us to this way of thinking. If it's taught correctly, it should bring us to this way of thinking. When we sit in our children sitting in the math classes, hopefully, and I know this doesn't usually happen, because this doesn't even happen with me when I was in math classes, but because this is like hidden. This is like the hidden value of mathematics. But we gotta get real deep into it to really be able to see the value in this way. Also, uneducated versus educated, complementary relationship. All right. So in conclusion, the serious study of mathematics early and often. You know how they say vote early and often? The serious study of mathematics early and often on a conceptual level. That's another key, the conceptual level, understanding the concepts. Why does the formula work? Why does it make sense? When I was young, I had a deficiency on conceptual understanding of mathematics. I was very good with procedure. Give me the formula, give me the algorithm, show me replace the numbers erase the letters with the numbers, and we work it out. I'll get the answer. Can I tell you why the answer was right? No. Can I tell you why it made sense? No. Can I tell you why does long division work? I didn't know. I know now. But back then I didn't know. But a lot of us lack the teaching the understanding on a conceptual level, right? But what the understanding on a conceptual level does, it provides us with a political education. Because those same concepts that are true in mathematics, right, they apply themselves in revolution. They apply themselves, and this is why I think back to, studying Kwame Ture in Ready for Revolution. He talked about being an undergraduate student at Howard. And we understand we see what he understood, right? He would tutor people in math. You think about Amilcar Cabral, PAIGC, Guinea-Bissau, going to war with the Portuguese. Cabral, before they started that revolution, he went to Portugal and studied engineering. Foundation of engineering is mathematics. I know he took a lot of math classes. So I think that, a lot of our people, Sundiata Acoli was on the New Jersey Turnpike with Assad Shakur when the New Jersey State Troopers tried to assassinate him, her, and they did assassinate Zayn Malik Shakur. Prior to that, and being part of the Black Liberation Army, he was a mathematics major at Prairie View A&M. He was a mathematician. So my belief is that a lot of our revolutionaries that had a strong math background, I believe that they understood the necessity for revolution, and this different type of thinking made sense because of, at least in part, because of their mathematical training. All right? So it's a subtle way that many of us may not initially notice. But this is another response. It's also another response to the question: why do I need to learn this? Why we learn this? Children always going to ask that question. It's a great question. Early in my career, I hated that question. You know why? Because I didn't have a good answer for that question. Nowadays, I got a lot of answers. And I also learned that the answer for everybody is not the same. There are different reasons for different people to learn different things. Right? So why they need to learn this? Right? To develop their political education. To develop their political awareness. Because it's the same concepts. The mathematical concepts mirror or overlap with the political concepts. All right? So studying math deeply can provide the political education simultaneously and help many of us to understand many so-called radical, I say so-called radical, because it's only radical in certain contexts. But a lot of the stuff that we fight for, we talk about, that sound radical, it really just basic. It's basic common sense.
I know that right.
Like really think about why is it radical to control your community? It's your community. You live there. But that's considered radical. So we also got to think about that too. Like that's considered radical in the larger context, in the context of a society that we don't control, right? And begin to see them as normal. This helps us to begin to see these things that we see as radical as normal, right? This is really normal, right? Educating your own children, controlling the curriculum. Those things are seen as radical. If somebody's homeschooling is seen as radical. Why is it radical? Again, you can't learn math though, because when you learn math, you start asking too many questions. Now you're a problem.
Now you're right.
Now you're a problem. You asking too many questions. This type of understanding enables us to build power. And that's why that's what this summer is about, building power. Right? We got to change our thinking, start using math as a tool. Right? Math is a tool for liberation. It's not just a class you want to avoid, it's not just something that's too hard, too difficult. I started a YouTube channel so I can teach the whole black community. So take out your phones, let you record right now. Go to the YouTube channel, subscribe to it. Become familiar with it, right? I have content from arithmetic all the way up through calculus 1. There are different playlists. Tell everybody, There are a lot of people teaching math on YouTube and on the internet. Not a lot of black people, right? And one thing I'll say is there's no YouTube channel where you'll be able to go and get quality instruction videos and also get some history. I'll give you an example. I've recorded videos with this t-shirt on before, right? So I start the video off, I got my Kwame Ture t-shirt on, so the person that's viewing might have never heard of Kwame Ture before. So it's one thing I'm exposing them to him and say, whoa, Kwame, who's this guy on this guy's shirt? Okay, I'm gonna give you a little 90-second, maybe 60-second brief intro to Kwame Ture, right? His brother's very important to me anyway. He's so important, I named my youngest child named after Kwame Ture, right? So I know a lot about him. So when you come to the channel, you're gonna get that, you look at the history, because as a classroom teacher, I realized that in addition to our children having deficiencies in mathematics, they also have deficiencies in knowledge of self and history because they haven't been taught. But understand, in order to maintain the system the way it is, they can't be taught. They can't know who Kwame Ture is. They gotta know who the commercial rappers are. They can't know who Kwame Ture is. They might start acting different. They can't know who Assad Shakur is. They might start acting different. So there's a very strategic and intentional process. It's not as if this information is being provided to them, presented to them in a meaningful way, and they're just the kids are nah, get that away from me. It's not like that, right? It's being strategically and systematically denied them. They're being denied, right? And we have to look at math the same way we understand that during chattel slavery it was illegal to teach our enslaved African ancestors how to read, right? Math is the same way. That's how math is today. But again, like you were supposed to say, like how do we do this while at the same time giving the impression that we are actually trying to show them how to do it? You're not really trying to do it. We got to do it for ourselves. So this is why the channel is here. Also a book. I wrote a book for parents called How to Use All This Math, Volume 1. The copy's available outside. What this book does is I take everyday activities and I show you how to create teachable moments out of them. How to teach your children algebra and arithmetic based on everyday activities. Simple things. Like something like this, right? Give you a great example. Hand sanitizer. It's 8.45 fluid ounces. At the same time, it's 250 milliliters. I show you how to do unit conversions between the British imperial system and the metric system. But the thing is, so you do that, you show your child how to do it once, and then they start doing it on a daily basis. Every time they go into the kitchen to get a snack, they do that calculation. Every time they grab a bottle of water or juice, do that calculation. So what happens is, you send your children to public school and charter schools or whatever, or private schools, right? They'll be prepared for math class. Because that's key. A lot of our children are not prepared for math class. They're going into math class unprepared. And it's not the fault of parents, it's social engineering. We've been socialized to believe that we don't need to prepare them for math class. That we just send them, the teachers are educated, they got degrees, they can teach our children how to do the math, how to understand the math. They can't. They're not equipped for that. The system is not equipped for that. The environment is not equipped for that. The children have to be prepared already. They got to go into the class already knowing what a fraction is. They got to already know what a proportion is, a ratio is, got to know what a percentage is, how to calculate percentage, they got to know that already. Because what we want to do, and this is how I apply Malcolm's quote, only a fool would send his children to be educated by his enemy. Some of us got to go to work. We can't homeschool, right? So the way around that is, we got to reorient ourselves and make these public schools places of practice. Not places of primary education. They got to become places of practice. Practicing what? The stuff that you taught them. The stuff that we taught them. The stuff that the community teaches. I want to feel like my ultimate goal is, like I live in North Philly. My ultimate goal is I want brothers on the block to be able to teach young people trigonometry. Come on now. Because if I remember, being a classroom teacher, if I had a quarter for every time young brother said, my old head told me this, my old head told me that, my old head told me this. Damn, what if your old head taught you how to graph a sine curve? What if your old head can teach you calculus? But somebody's got to teach the old head calculus. Yeah. So I want for us to learn this. There's a YouTube channel, it's not just for children, it's for adults too. I got videos on there with my daughter. I'm trying to model, listen, before I'm a math teacher, I'm a black man first, I'm a black father second, and I teach my own children. I'm showing you can do this too. And you don't gotta have a degree. I got a couple of degrees, but you don't need them for that. You don't need to have degrees in order to teach your children the math. That's where the book comes into play, and the YouTube channel comes into play. A lot of people, we offer criticisms of the black community saying, black people should do this, black people should do that. With long criticism, we're short on resources. We gotta be balanced. We gotta offer critique. Critique is healthy. Constructive criticism is healthy, not destructive. But we also gotta offer the resources to couple with the critique. So they say, all right, yeah, brother, you should be doing this. Sis, you should be doing this. Boom, there you go. Try this. Take this with you. You can do that. Right? So I want us to reorient ourselves. I want us to be able to, if your children are going to public school or private or charter, it should be a space for practice. Because then that's when you make the racist white teacher irrelevant. That's when you make the bourgeois Negro black teacher irrelevant. It's like, I don't really need you anyway, just give me problems. I'm gonna practice what my parents taught me already. I'm just here just to, practice and, socialize and, really not that relevant. Because, no, seriously though, because learning, on a serious note, learning is a very vulnerable activity. It's very difficult to learn something from somebody that you don't like, or that you know does not like you. So somebody, you feel like, well, this person doesn't even respect my humanity, so I'm gonna learn geometry from you. I'm gonna do that. But I can sit in your classroom and just, do some geometry practice from some work I already know, because my community taught me, my parents taught me, my aunts, my uncles, my big cousins, my older siblings, my grandparents, whoever. They showed me how to, find an area of a rectangle, parallelogram, find an area of circles and, different things like that. They showed me that already. I'm just here to practice. That's what I want for us. until we have a vast network of independent African center schools, this is where we are. So until we get to that point, our children got to be prepared. They got to be able to go into the classroom, prepared for math. Because one of the last things I'll say is this: we send our children into math class unprepared. It's like sending them into a boxing match when they've never trained a day in their life. They're going up against a world-class fighter. They're going to get their head boxed off. So our children go into these classes, they get their head boxed off by math. And that causes the math anxiety. And that causes the math phobia. And it sticks with them. And they end up hating math. And then years later, they're at a restaurant, enjoying themselves, and the waiter come out and talk about, do y'all want the same check or separate checks? You talk about separate checks and they start to get nervous. Say, look, I got to do some math. That's because that experience they had in 6th grade. That's when the math phobia creeped in. So I'm trying to avoid and prevent the math phobia from ever creeping in. We got to protect our children from math phobia. We got to shield them and guard them from that. We got to protect them from it and make sure they never get it, never develop it. So in the book, you can use the skills in the book and just practice them on a daily basis, so you get their repetition in. Because, you'd be surprised. So do we have time for questions, or is that going to be later? All right. Wait, is that a yeah or no? Wrap it up. Okay, yeah.
We'll be back.
Yeah. So that's all I want to say. I hope you picked up something from this, and I hope we're able to at least start, if you weren't already doing it, start looking at math differently, right? Not as something that you run from, but something that you run towards. Because math is a tool that's going to protect you. Like we got the Elmer Geronimo Crack Gun Club here, right? Math is a weapon. Just like that firepower, right? Protect yourself with math. Yeah. Yes.
I've never ever asked this before. I'll probably never ask it again. But since the grandbabies just walked in, can you give me a 5-minute
Right on.
quick through?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
These are STEAM students,
Okay.
so just that concept for them will be very powerful.
And I apologize if I'm running in anybody else's time, but just never forget, we're here for the salvation of our grandbabies.
Right on.
So,
I say, brother.
So welcome. I want to welcome you all to the presentation. I just finished the presentation, but I'll just give a little brief synopsis. My name is Akil Parker. I'm a math professor at Cheney University up in Pennsylvania. I came down to talk about mathematics, but how, math is really a tool for liberation, right? And I want to make sure that you have a positive relationship with mathematics, right? A lot of people are kind of nervous about math, but it really is a way for us to better understand the world, understand the politics of the world, right? That's like a hidden benefit, right? It's kind of embedded within it. So whether you're studying algebra, whether you're learning your arithmetic, studying geometry, you all look like you're around elementary or middle school age. Middle school, yeah. Middle school is like the turning point. So you want to study as much math as you can. And if you don't like math, I would say this. I think that's a program. A lot of us have been programmed to dislike math. Because if you like math, you're much more likely to excel in math. And if you can excel in math, then you can solve problems. Not just problems in class, but problems in the world, problems in your community, problems in your neighborhood, right? So don't fall for it. It's programming, right? Don't fall for the fact that like a lot of your textbooks, you might only see white people in your textbooks. So when you only see white people in your textbooks, formulas only named after white people, and people that don't look like you, might make you feel like math is not for you. Math is for you. It just so happens that white people are the ones that print the textbooks, right? But they learn the mathematics from us. So they learned the math from us, and then they made the textbooks. And now they make it look like they created it. But they didn't. So don't let that deter you. If that's deterring you, don't let that deter you either. So definitely, and also remember, like for the science, technology, and engineering, math is the foundation. Math is the foundation of all that, right? So then you go into computer science, architecture, medicine, engineering, computer engineering, coding, all these types of things, right? And you can actually do it for your people and do it for your community. So you can help to build the nation, right?
You gotta do the Kwame Ture slide since you're wearing your
Kwame Ture slide? Yeah, so,
And tell them about the YouTube channel.
yeah, YouTube channel, all this map, y'all got phones? I know you got phones. Y'all play Roblox on your phone? Minecraft? Take your phones out and go to your YouTube app and subscribe to the All This Math YouTube channel.
And share it.
Yeah, share it. Definitely. Appreciate it. So this is Kwame Ture right here. It's a picture of probably when he was doing civil rights work in Mississippi. Might have been on somewhere near this campus, right, in the 1960s. He's also on my t-shirt. Kwame Ture right here, my t-shirt. One of my heroes. One of the things he said in the debate with Bayard Rustin, who was another civil rights activist, but had a different political ideology, he said that integration in the 1960s was a subterfuge, which is like a trick. You know, it's like when you're trying to, I don't know, the subterfuge is like a distraction. You distract somebody, you know, it's a distraction, right, to maintain white power and white supremacy. So it wasn't meant to really improve the conditions of black people. So what I'm saying is that today, you'll see a lot of what are called diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, right? Europeans that control organizations will try to include you. But be careful, because oftentimes they'll try to include you just so that you don't create your own organization. So you don't create your own company. Because it's easier to just hire you, even when you become an adult. It's easier for them to just say, well, I'll hire you and pay you $100,000 a year. That seems like a lot of money. If you never made $100,000 a year, it is a lot of money. But think about from their perspective. I can pay you $100,000, so that way you won't start your own company and compete with me. And if you compete, if your company makes $5 million a year, that keeps them from losing that $5 million. If you're in the same industry with them. So keep these things in mind. Everything you learn it so that you can benefit your community. And that's lessons. And these are books for parents, where I'm trying to help our children be prepared for math class. You know, be prepared to understand fractions better, decimals, percentages, right? All those things that we'll see on standardized tests that we get caught up on. We really just don't have enough practice. Sometimes we do poorly because we haven't been taught properly, but then sometimes we do poorly because we haven't had enough practice. So this gives us an opportunity to create teachable moments out of those everyday activities, like when you're riding in the car. You know, there's one example where I call it license plate games, where, because we'd be surprised, we take it for granted that all young people know addition facts. 7 plus 5, 8 plus 9, right? A lot of our young people might not know, especially with this recent pandemic and they weren't in the classroom, right? So this gives them an opportunity to sit in the car, tell the young people to put the device down, put the phone down, right? Look at that car in front of us. Look at the numbers on that license plate in front of us. Let's practice, do some addition, add those numbers together. And imagine every time they ride in the car, they practice in that skill. How much extra math practice that is. And they're doing it in a safe space. Because you love them. And they're in the car with you. So it's not that stress. They're not worried about, raising their hand in class, potentially getting the wrong answer, and everybody laughing at them. They're not worried about none of that. So they're learning and practicing the skill in a safe space, a comfortable space, a space where there's love. So then, when they do go to school, if it's not as welcoming of an environment, they are able to practice what they learned with you.
Sir, I do have one question. How much are your books?
The books are selling so with me today, they're on sale for $30. On Amazon, they're $34.95 plus shipping. But today, $30.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Well, we gotta move on. Yeah. All right, well, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.